Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of Podcast vs. Enemies, a Destiny Massive Breakdown show. My name is Saint Kabir, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Court and Impetus. This week, we'll be following up on some of the sandbox updates from the previous episode in 12, a little more granular detail, as well as touching back on a previously covered GM, the Fallen SABER. Court, who do we have to thank this week before we get started?
Hello, Saint Impetus. Hope you're both doing well. We only have one community feedback this week. No chartable reviews or direct mentions on our socials. But this is from Mad Logarithm, who tagged me. It was actually asking about Come to Pass, which was the Witch Queen weapon, and just how it's kind of general placement now that the ARC 3.0 is available. So they can pair Gold Tricorn. And also gave some feedback, saying that last episode 35, was a banger. I just got done listening to it. Appreciate all the time you folks do on spending on the builds. Can't wait to try some of them out. Thanks for all the hard work you all put in to make us all enjoy Destiny even more. So thank you very much for that. And just a reminder, you can send us all kinds of feedback directly to any of our socials or via the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord server. Positive, critical, constructive feedback all helps with the trajectory of the podcast and how we present and break down builds, activities, and much more in the PvE sandbox for both the established Destiny players and the new likes. So don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any questions as well, or ideas for builds, all that good stuff. We're all happy to talk Destiny. And of course, we do use Chartable to aggregate our podcast reviews, but this may take some time for non-US listeners for their reviews to appear. Alternatively, you can just send one of us your review to any of our socials. Also want to extend a special thanks and appreciation to everyone that supports PvE, whether that's downloading, listening to our show, discussing it in the Discord server, or supporting us via Patreon. Impetus, what have we got this week?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of a surprise, and then, of course, our planned topics. So the surprise was the 1310 TWAB. We weren't quite expecting a meaty one, but we did get that. We have some economy changes, some changes to resources, and then also a follow-up to the weapon changes that were discussed in the TWAB before that. So we'll be touching on the highlights, just giving our thoughts, doing a little roundtable there. And then, of course, we're in the midst of Grandmaster season, so we are continuing that with the Fallen SABER. We have already done this GM in an earlier season, so we're not going to be doing a complete bit-by-bit breakdown of it. We're going to be giving an overview. Obviously, this is our first time covering this GM with ARC 3.0 out, so we will be giving you some updated class builds and recommendations, and then also some updated weapon breakdown or weapon complements to that GM. So without further ado, we're going to jump into some housekeeping and our What Did We Do in Destiny 2 Last Week section here. Pretty light on the housekeeping. We did kind of have a mid-week change here. The supposed adept weapon that was going to be dropping this past week was Mindbender's Ambition, the shotgun, famous shotgun. It, however, came to light that it was only dropping with one perk in column 3 and one perk in column 4. Typically, there's going to be an additional one in either one of those columns for the adepts. So that was removed, the Mindbender's Ambition was, and it's been replaced with Horror's Least due to that issue. So that may it will mess up the weapon schedule that is tied to these GMs as they come out week over week. So we don't actually know what that will be, if it's just a simple case of Horror's Least and Mindbenders being swapped. It could be a little bit more than that, so we're not sure. We will keep you guys updated, but for this past week, we have now had Horror's Least dropping with the appropriate perks. So hopefully Mindbenders can show up again in a non-bugged state, but yeah, that's been our big update here. We're going to move into What Did We Do in Destiny 2 Last Week. I have run some Deepstone Crypts with folks in my clan and also the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord. That was our featured raid in the Rotator this past week, so always good stepping back into that raid, running it. Very fun raid. I leveled up my Doom of Calcus because I did finally get that unlocked, and my Brigand's Law and my second BXR Battler. I did finally hit GM level last night. That would have been Saturday night, but because the featured weapon was changed to Horror's Least, I have not done a GM yet because I don't need a Horror's Least. I've got some pretty great rolls already for it. I was hoping to run in and grab a new Mindbenders to test out in PvE, so I will wait for that weapon to show up at a later time before I start doing some GMs. Court, what did you do this past week?
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned Deepstone Crypt there. I have not done Deepstone Crypt this week. I was meaning to do some runs because it is one of my favorite raids. It's definitely up there. I think we've talked about Kingsfall still in that sort of honeymoon phase just now, and Vow of the Disciples definitely, still all time for me anyway. But Deepstone Crypt is very close. It's a very fond memories with that raid. But I have not been doing Deepstone Crypt. I have been doing Kingsfall. I've been doing the Master Daughter challenge. Pretty simple challenge. I think there's been a little bit of a misconception, some misinformation leading up to this, where there was talk of you had to rotate the platforms, which is not the case. You just have to, once you're on the platform, you cannot jump off, and if you do, you have to rotate with someone else within that individual subphase. So once you've collected the Blight Guard, you can then step back onto that plate if you need to. But yeah, pretty simple challenge. I think it's, compared to the earlier challenges with War Priest and Totems, it's a lot more simple, but still enjoyable nonetheless. I have been using Quicksilver Storm a lot, quite a lot, especially in Arc Shield and Burn activities, due to that rocket being arc. Not the grenade, the launched grenade, that's just kinetic, but the actual rocket that sometimes fires out when you're sustained fire. I was getting my super back within, first 2 minutes of Lightblade in the many runs that I was doing, due to the increased active gains that you do get with primary weapons, dealing damage, and which, Quicksilver Storm puts a lot of damage out. I wasn't even running high intellect. I was at tier 3, so that's base level. And I was just getting my super back really fast. And I was running Gathering Storm, which is one of the sort of slower cooldown supers. So I think maybe something that we need to talk about in a much future episode, way down the line, just to kind of explain how active and passive super gains work in the game, because there is a little bit of misunderstanding how was I getting my super back really fast. And it's quite simple. You just put a lot of damage down, and you also receive a lot of damage, especially in Grandmasters. Outside of that, though, I am just sort of taking my kind of regular seasonal mini break from Destiny, just popping on for story stuff, or Grandmasters, or raids, Crucible sessions if anyone needs it. But yeah, pretty quiet week. We are heading into Festival of the Lost very shortly, so might be on a little bit more. But yeah, Saint, what you been up to?
I also jumped in for the Daughters Challenge, and kind of like Court said, it was not much of a challenge, or like the mechanic part of it. It's just not very difficult. I get. People may have a hard time figuring out their loadouts and stuff like that to deal with all these champions and stuff like that effectively, but the actual mechanic of it was not much of a challenge. We actually thought that it was much more complicated on day one. We were like rotating these, players around to the different platforms, and it turns out that you just can't break off of a platform once you jump on until a piece of the brand is claimed, and that's actually way easier. It's basically just like, don't mess up, right? Just don't jump off the platform, stay committed, and that's the whole challenge. I thought the Floor is Lava triumph was like a lot more fun, but I get that one's supposed to be kind of silly, and not as much so something you're going to be running on Master. But other than that, I just some kind of Pinnacle stuff and running with friends a little bit, but not a ton of Destiny this past week. I was back on Massive Breakdowns for episode 279 with Kit, and that was great. Love talking with him. We talked about all the 30th anniversary special weapons from a Crucible standpoint, so be sure to go check that out to get more details basically on why is the Wastelander so much better than the Matador, honestly, is the moral of that episode. So, tune in for more detail. All right. I've also been playing Ni no Kuni remastered. Legend of the White Witch was remastered and put on PC Game Pass. So I have just really been enjoying playing a Studio Ghibli movie. Honestly, it is real nice to just kind of chill for a little bit. So a little bit of that, a little bit of Destiny, some GM stuff. But yeah, overall, a pretty calm week on that front. We did not have a calm TWAB though. This came with a lot of details. Honestly, some stuff I was not anticipating to be made, especially in kind of a mid-season announcement type of a thing like this. Like these feel like pretty big quality of life changes. I'll start us off here with the first one about destination materials. In season 19, players will be unable to obtain the following destination materials: Dust-like shards from the EDZ, data lattice from Nessus, helium filaments from the Moon, Baron Bow from the Dreaming City, spin metal from Cosmodrome, glacial stalwart from Europa. So basically, any destination material that's still out there that is still going to your inventory as an actual stack of the material when you collect it, that is completely going away. Instead, this is going to kind of work like it does on the Throne World. You will collect, the little item from the ground, and it's not going to give you nothing. It'll give you like a little bit of XP, or maybe some reputation for that destination if that is, like an active system there. And then it can also give like a little bit of glimmer or something like that. So it'll be like, think very minor kind of passive gains, which honestly, if they give whatever 200 glimmer and just a tiny bit of XP, that's about the same effective value as the currencies were anyways. Honestly, if anything, it's better. And kind of the reasoning they gave for this was that these were just they felt like these had just become very arbitrary materials, right? And for new players, it's just like an extra barrier for them to get through whenever they're trying to interact with systems of buying things. And it just felt like kind of an extra layer there of cognitive load that you have to think through exchanging your materials through Rahul or Spider or whoever, because that's just what it came down to for however much you need of whatever the material it was. So it just wasn't really serving a specific purpose, and now they're all just going to work like the Throne World, which I don't know. Any thoughts on this, you guys? I think this is pretty good change.
When I was writing up the script for this episode and just looking at the TWAB, I was thinking, right, so they're doing all these changes, and I'm thinking, for us, again, we're established players. We've probably got thousands of all these currencies and various planetary materials and all that. But for a new player coming in and they're getting barraged with all the other stuff that we have complained about with the New Light experience, getting barraged with all this, here's a weapon, here's this, here's a quest that you can do, here's the vendor that you can visit. Yeah, mods, exotics that you can maybe chase after. And then they've got all these materials, and it kind of bloats up the game to make it appear that this game has a heavy emphasis on materials when it doesn't really. So I'm completely happy with this change. I think there's been a little bit, nothing to the extent of people going really, social media mad over a very small change, which, this is fundamentally within the game's economy system. It is quite small, but I've got no problem with this. I think they are just very, just arbitrary. And yeah, just for like a new light experience coming in and just getting barraged with all this material. I never thought about that when I was reading down this TWAB, and just that point really stuck out for me. On the second time that I read the TWAB, I was thinking, all right, okay, yeah, this does actually make a lot of sense. For us, maybe not so much, but for New Lights, yeah.
Yeah, it's this is going to be a big change. Like, this has been a huge part of Destiny for so long now. Like, that was one of the first things I ever looked up when I first started playing D1 was the optimal path to go pick up all of the spin metal leaves on the Cosmodrome, because that's where I was spending most of my time as a New Light player, doing those loops and stuff. And
gotta get your route down, bro.
Exactly. So I'm absolutely happy that these are gone. I hate the destination materials. It never felt like they were really integrated well into the game, other than to buy upgrade modules for me at least. So yeah, good riddance. Clear up that inventory space, make way for other items that I may or may not need in the future. But yeah, this is a big change. This is going to be a pretty big defining mark for players to come after this versus players that remember what it was like to go do the route.
I think, again, just from the perspective of us, I don't think I can remember the last time I've went to a planet to collect or harvest, as the term that they use. I would just buy them. If I needed them to upgrade my armor or to upgrade weapons or whatever that was required to be upgraded, I would just buy them from either Spider when Tango Cho was still about, or Rahul now. So yeah. They did talk about in Season 19, public events will receive a Glimmer boost. I'm not exactly sure how much Glimmer we get just now, but they said for normal, they'll reward between 3,300 up to 4,645. For the heroic version, they will reward between 10,000 up to 12,500 Glimmer. And those are just raw numbers, without any Ghost Glimmer mods or bonuses enabled. So I think really heavy emphasis on Glimmer from here on out, of which we'll talk about Master Rahul here. The materials exchange will still continue to provide the service. Rahul will continue to accept any destination materials exchanged at a lower rate than, well, currently where we are just now. Again, this is all in Season 19. Rahul will no longer sell these materials to players, so you will instead exchange them for Glimmer. And it's 5,000 Glimmer for a stack of 20, or 250 Glimmer for each single, so from between 1 to 19. We'll also sell, or I should say exchange, excess Dark Fragments, which is one of the Dreaming City currencies, Phantasmal Fragments, which is the Moon's Nightmare currency, and Here Always pieces, which I have about 20,000 additional. That is one of the additional European material. So they'll still be used within the respective areas. I think that's just important to highlight. They're not going away, but they can be now exchanged if you have many, which I have of all of them.
You made some good investments. Now you're set up for years, you know?
I will never have enough Glimmer now. I will always have an infinite amount of Glimmer because I've got an infinite amount of Here Always pieces. They mentioned here as well enhancement prisms and ascendant shards when they will now be replaced with legendary shard costs instead of destination materials. So the new costs are as follows. 1 enhancement prism will be purchased with 10 enhancement cores, 10 legendary shards, and 10,000 Glimmer. And for the ascendant shard, or golf balls as people were calling them, buy with 10 enhancement prisms, 50 legendary shards, and 50,000 Glimmer. So nice little change there. Thoughts? Everyone good with that?
How are Ascendant Shards cheaper than Iron Banner weapons that I want to focus? 50 legendary shards for an Ascendant Shard, and it's what? 250 legendary shards for an Iron Banner focus? I can't remember.
No way. Is it really that expensive?
It's over 100. Is it 100 legendary shards? It might be 100 legendary shards.
I'm sure it is 100, because I know folks have been focusing those weapons, and they have like 100 legendary shards left. And I'm sat here because I don't really focus any of those weapons, and I'm sat here with like 10,000 legendary shards. I'm thinking, how you guys got so little shards? They're focusing.
Just buy 2 Ascendant Shards now. You don't even need those weapons anymore.
The weekend that Reed's Regret was around, and you could focus Trials Engram, I
think it's maybe the Adept
dumped
Trials loot that's 250.
Yeah. It was absurdly expensive, and I was like, I know I'm never coming back to do this again, so I'm just gonna like grind as many engrams as possible and just dump resources. That and the borrowed time SMG, right? I was trying to get my damn Ivan approved roll, and it took me another 3,000 legendary shards or something like that, and God knows too many matches to camp it, but whatever, that's over, thankfully.
But at least, I mean, this cost is very doable for new players, and I think for people that can't get into a GM their first season, right? They're still trying to figure out the leveling system. this should be a really good way for them to be able to masterwork exotic or legendary armor that they get that is worthwhile. So I'm very happy with this change. I think it just throws the weapon focusing costs way out of line for what I can get for both prisms and shards. So a very good change in this regard as well.
Yeah. Also, if you're somebody that can play high tier Nightfalls, don't buy these. Please never buy these things.
True.
It's really just not worth the value if you're capable of running your master tier Nightfalls and things like that. Just get in there with some friends and grind them out on a weekend, for a couple hours, and you'll have materials for, the whole season. Next up, some kind of minor changes. Anything that was related to the exotic weapons from the Monuments to Lost Light kiosk will just have some minor updates. So none of those destination materials are going to be included in there anymore. They will have a slightly higher legendary shard cost, but that's about it. And then any raid exotic is still just going to be 240 spoils, right? For all the raid exotics, I believe, in the kiosk. So you'll still be spending just spoils on those raid exotics, and instead of destination materials, just a little more legendary shards on the price there for any of those other exotic weapons. And then a couple mods. The materialism mods have been removed, and then the bountiful harvest mods for your like resource node harvesting will give you basically and more glimmer when you are harvesting resource nodes. So the stuff that was like giving more materials when you would harvest materials is just all gone, right? Or getting materials when you'd finish a match or anything like that, which makes sense. They're just kind of like cleaning up, bits of the resources here.
Yes, sorry, I was looking at a few other things here. We're talking about resource nodes. Yes, that's the next part.
Yeah, so kind of hand in hand with the materials, and their exchange and all that. Just like the Throne Worlds, they give a little glimmer, they give a little XP, they'll give a little reputation for whatever area you're on. They're not going to be giving new rep systems for old vendors like Devrim and Failsafe or Petra, but they are working on improving those experiences in the future. And then the stuff that's coming from Devrim or Failsafe right now, you can just basically buy directly from them instead of having like rank requirements or anything like that. You want one of the ghost shells from Nessus or whatever, you just go buy it from Failsafe for like 10 shards, which, I mean, I don't, if you're a collector, you want to go buy these weird emblems and cosmetics, that's great. But again, this kind of just seems like cleaning up the whole currencies system rework.
I just looked up a list of the sunset weapons that you can buy from these vendors and just seeing what they had, because I had forgotten. I hadn't been over there in so long, but it looks like Nessus has a lot of what are these Amalon weapons? Yeah, looks like obviously Uriel's gift could drop from there. It looks like only Last Hope and then the Moss Epic 3 were ones that were brought back as random rolls, but yeah, I know it's hard to give loot pools for all these weapons, but like if you wanted to make these old destinations matter, give them weapons that we can focus and really give them a proper reputation system. I know that takes time, obviously, and it's not just the economy team that would work on that. That's also the weapons team that would have to get involved. But if you want me to go grind out public events on Nessus to get my Glimmer stores up instead of trading in my 50,000 Here Always pieces, like that'd be a really, I say simple. It's very resource intensive now, but like that would be the way that I think ideally we'd want it set up is, I'll go do my public events, I'll get my Glimmer stores, I'll get my rep going for Failsafe on Nessus, and then I can go in and, turn in, get these Nessus engrams, and then focus on one of these new specific destination weapons. One day, man, maybe one day.
So some a little more interesting changes coming up at the end here of the TWAB.
Yes, we did get some clarifications and then just kind of some reminders about weapons. So again, we are halfway through the Lord of Wolves rework. We got part 1, which is I think more to address its performance or order performance in PvP, but this time around we are getting the second half, which is the PvE changes, which are being highlighted. So when the exotic perk Release the Wolves is active, The ADS accuracy penalty has been reduced from 10 times to 3 times, so should make hitting your shots with Release the Wolves a little bit less harsh or more forgiving. They have removed the 25% universal base damage buff, and instead have added a 40% additional PvE damage buff. They have removed the 50% critical hit multiplier penalty as well, and then full auto is being added as an intrinsic perk to Lord of Wolves. So that's interesting. It's got pretty good range as a shotgun. I mean, we aren't exactly thrilled with shotgun performance right now. We do have them as an unstoppable mod this season. They've been fun to play with, but I think at general PvE we're kind of shying away from them. But this should be kind of interesting to see how it performs. The full auto thing is definitely going to be nice. The 40% additional PvE damage buff is going to be very strong and noticeable right off the rip. So I'm excited to try it out, but I don't have a lot of hope for that in particular. What do you guys think about what has been discussed regarding Lord of Wolves as a PvE potential weapon?
Well, Merck was mentioning this was last season where he was talking about the rework. And he mentioned that this may be the sort of the hyper burst weapon, whether it's against a champion or if it's against a Lucent Hive or anything that's like the Tormentors that we'll see next in Lightfall. So that may be the use case for Lord of Wolves, because I can't really see it being used elsewhere. So maybe that sort of pseudo Izanagi's, like, here's your hyper burst weapon that you only use to during solar burn, or anything that's got like buffs to really hyper intensify that burstness of Lord of Wolves. But yeah, remains to be seen. I do want to try it out next season, and I don't know, maybe we'll get like a shotgun champion mod that isn't unstoppable on barrier shotgun.
Sorry, best I can do is a sidearm.
Every time. Yeah, very, very interesting. We will see. Next thing they touched on were sniper rifles. We've got some more hard facts about the changes to sniper rifles, and that is they are reducing the amount of flinch received in PvE. They are trying to avoid adversely affecting that experience compared to their PvP changes that are coming to sniper rifles. So again, I haven't really tried using a sniper rifle this season, even though they do have a barrier option around. I use Izanagi's obviously in raids and stuff, so the less flinch there is going to be very nice. I'll still miss my ×4 honed edge shot, but at least I'll have to blame myself this time instead of being flinched by some enemy. So that is a good change. Excited to see that. The other balancing note that we got was in regards to machine guns. So they want to reduce the difference between them and other heavy weapons in PvE, specifically by making them less punishing for use in ad clear, which is their primary role according to Bungie. So again, not really hard specific facts about how they're going about this, but definitely do want to see machine guns kind of come to the forefront. They are very good for ad clear, and this season in particular, they're also really good for stunning overload champions, which we'll talk about in our Nightfall here in just a moment. But yes, it would be very nice to see them. I think personally, I would like to see their magazines increased just a little bit more. Maybe a dozen other bullets added, I think would really help. I know some players are still a little skittish in regards to using a heavy weapon for ad clear, knowing how hard it is to generate heavy ammo bricks consistently if you're not using Aeons. So I think if we could get more ammo into these weapons and then just have more ammo drop from the brick itself, might be enough to get push players towards using them. I really love using machine guns. They definitely have a fun fantasy for just mowing down enemies in a coming out of those spawn doors or spawning in. So if we can make them even better, I will be very happy. How about you guys?
Yeah, completely echo that. I think just a higher bump to the magazine would help out really well here. I think some people have been wanting machine guns to be like the boss damage, or even like a burst champion damage type of weapon, and it's like I don't think their use case for ad clear is a better fit compared to, oh, let's just use a machine gun for damage. Now, there are different, Xenophage and Thunderlord are the exceptions here, and they do really good burst and overall DPS, sustained DPS, but machine guns for this inverse type of like ad clear for your heavy, and say like Izanagi's or other, something else, like, or use Lord of Wolves as a case here. Lord of Wolves as your burst damage weapon, machine gun as your ad clears, and the other weapon as just a sort of cleanup or something long range. I think that would be a perfect fit. But currently in the current sandbox, yes, we've got overload machine guns. It's just not quite there. So I look forward to this. It's quite vague here. They just say less punishing to use for ad clearing. But I look forward to what they have in plan for machine guns. Because like what you said, Impetus they are really fun just to mow down a bunch of ads and to sort of use as your primary weapon. But yeah, the ammo economy is what's bringing it down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know how I feel about machine guns. If it's if we're not talking Xeno, I don't want to talk. All right,
Xeno doesn't count. That's just a massive sniper rifle.
Yeah,
or scout rifle.
Oh man.
But yeah, I'm always excited to see any underperformer getting buffed up to make it more any sandbox where there are better choices or worse choices depending on the timing length of your DPS encounter. It's a good sandbox. Where your loadout is changing depending how close can I get, how much time do I have. I think when we are in a meta where those are different answers is like perfect balance, right? You've got options for burst, you got options for sustained, you've got options for up close and far away, and this is only gonna help that be more of a reality. So always for buffing the underperformers. That is pretty much everything from this most recent TWAB. So now we're going to jump into some Fallen Saber builds and just talk about what we are going to be running, what we kind of run in the past, or what we're running now this season. Impetus, take it away.
Yeah. So according to our current schedule, Duty Bound is the adept weapon that will be dropping with Fallen Saber. That could be changed. We're not entirely sure whether or not the Mindbender swap that happened this past week will be affecting other things, but this will be for the auto rifle. We have two champion types here, Barrier and Overload. There are a fair number of both in the GM. Thankfully, we do have options, good number of options for both. So looking at our Barrier mods here, this season we have Auto Rifle, Sniper Rifle, and Scout Rifle as your options in the artifact. For Overload, we have Bow, Machine Gun, and Arc Grenades. Our shields, we have Arc and Void shields. Again, pretty good mix of both throughout the GM. There is an Arc Acute Burn in the Fallen Saber. That is 25% increase in your outgoing damage and a 50% increase in the incoming Arc damage. And again, there is a lot of Arc damage in this GM. Some noteworthy special enemies. We do have some environmental damage to be aware of. Can be particularly painful in certain areas here. These are really just constructs and platforms that deal arc energy, and this arc energy is an instant kill. If you've gone through the hallway, done this before in the strike playlist, you'll know what I'm talking about. So there's that one hallway where you need to go deposit a charge. And then, of course, in the boss room as well, there are some shifting platforms that will produce arc energy. These are lethal. Do not try to engage with these. You cannot counteract or out-resist the damage. It is an instant death, so be aware of that. In terms of our actual enemies, we do have a number of exploding shanks. We have Tracer and Sniper shanks. Those can be very annoying to deal with. We have invisible enemies. Those are our Fallen Marauders. Those are melee-based enemies that will rush up and sneak up on you. And then at the start, we have one Falling Warsat, which is very fun to kill your friends with. Just be aware of that, of course. As it comes in, it does have a very wide blast radius, so those are your kind of noteworthy things to be aware of. Moving on to our weapons here, we again have a lot of options for both our exotic and legendary weapons here. I'll start with our primaries. On the exotic primary front, we have Wishender that has barrier intrinsically now. Very, very strong bow in your kinetic slot. Quicksilver Storm. Court was talking about this before. Very solid option. This will also be barrier with the auto rifle mod, as well as Hardlight and Monte Carlo if you want to go in a melee build route. Those are your anti-barrier exotic primary recommendations. For 2 overloads, obviously Lemon Arc and Trinity Ghoul, the exotic bows, Arc and Void and Arc respectively, very strong in here. Really, really good for ad clear, and then also with dealing with those pesky overload captains. Definitely recommend one of those depending on what you want to run in terms of your subclass for certain pairings. And then our final exotic primary, this does not have a champion mod, so just be aware of that. You'd probably need to put on a champion mod for your special and or heavy weapon here, but it is still very effective. That is Risk Runner. That will give you a resist to incoming arc damage, which is really the reason we love using it, and then it also will chain lightning between enemies when you're in that special mode. That can be very effective for crowd control. Back when SMGs had Overload SMG, this was always my recommendation. So it's still strong, but you're not going to be able to deal with champions with it this time around, but you can still certainly bring it in. On our legendary front here, I'm just going to talk about scouts, auto rifles, and bows here. So on the legendary scout rifle, our recommendation is going to be Tarnished Metal, Contingency Plan, Doom of Chelchis, and Vouchsafe. For our legendary auto rifle recommendations, Come to Pass, Sweet Sorrow, and Gnawing Hunger. And then for legendary bows, Wolftone Draw, Arsenic Bite, and Under Your Skin are going to be the big players here. Moving on to our specials, again, we have a lot of different options for the exotics. Agar Scepter, very, very strong in here for crowd control. The closeness, the smallness of the spaces as we move through this GM really allow you to kind of get good angles on ad spawns and then punish those ads as they come out. You can then chain the freeze effect on kills. So if you are running a stasis subclass, this can be a very natural pairing. Similarly, in the same vein here, Wither Horde, going to be very strong for punishing ad spawns and then just denying, especially those exploding shanks as they are moving towards you from advancing if you can get the pool below them as they approach. For champions here, I got 3 recommendations. Izanagi's Bird, going to be great for barrier champions, but then after you've stunned any champion, getting that ×4 honed edge is going to be excellent for that burst, extreme burst damage on them to quickly melt them. Very strong. Divinity, of course, it's an arc weapon. It also does overload intrinsically, very consistent for that debuff as well. Very, very useful for the overload champions if you would like that as well, and then also for bursting down the boss. And then, of course, our tried and true, the classic Arbalist, very useful for barrier champions, and then popping those Arc and Void shields that you will encounter throughout the GM. Moving on to our special legendary weapons, we have Anti-Barrier Sniper, so I'll touch on that quickly. Again, I think the safest option here is probably to have a Kinetic Sniper and then an Elemental Primary. So the 3 Kinetic Snipers that we would recommend would be Succession, Defiance of Yasmin, and then Silicon Aroma. You can use those to pop down any enemies and then use your Elemental Primary for popping any shields. We do have some elemental specials that I want to touch on, or energy specials, I should say. If you want to run a grenade launcher, Salvager Salvo for Barons, that can be very, very potent for generating wells, or if you have a specific exotic that needs some kills of a specific type, like arc kills. We also, if you're running an arc subclass, have several fragments that tie into getting arc special kills. So those 2 grenade launchers would be very, very strong in that regard. And then the last thing I'll bring to your attention would be really any Reservoir Burst fusion rifle. Reservoir Burst is a perk that shows up on legendary fusion rifles. It's kind of like Chain Reaction, but a bit more specialized. So it's the first bullet within a full clip will deal an explosion after defeating an enemy. Thankfully, all of our Reservoir Burst fusion rifles are Arc or Void, so they would be natural pairings in here. We've got Null Composure, that's our Void one, that can be bought in the exotic kiosk if you missed out on Season of the Splicer when it was the featured weapon. Midow's Reckoning and Plug One, we've talked about both of these before. Those are our Arc ones, so this is definitely a great, really strong pairing here within this GM. Those all roll Reservoir Burst, and then Snorri FR5 is the other Void That's a world drop Amalan fusion rifle that rolls with Reservoir Burst. Those can be very powerful here, depending on what subclass. If you're running an Arc subclass and you want to tie into those fragments, Midow's Reckoning and Plug One in particular will be quite strong with getting those chained kills if you can wait for enough enemies to spawn in and then target that middle one. Very, very powerful. On to our heavies, the exotics here. Thunderlord, going to be great in here. Got that overload intrinsically, and then just dealing great sustained damage in the boss fight. Very useful. You can chain the lightning strikes to any enemies standing near the champion when you go for that stun, or if you're just using it for crowd control. A lot of different options, a lot of different ways to play it. I think that's going to be the most forgiving heavy exotic that you can bring into here. Anarchy also going to be very useful. We've got a lot of close range enemies. You want to lock off in areas so they stop advancing. The Anarchy is your weapon of choice. And then if you are trying to figure out if you're going to farm this GM, trying to figure out what would be the most effective heavy weapon damage strat, I think Galahorn's probably going to be the best bet here. If you want to bring in rockets, that's definitely a contender for quickly bursting down the boss through those phases. On the legendary front, again, LFRs and rockets, not a whole lot of innovation here from our picks, but for the Arc LFRs, Storm Chaser, Sails by Pitch Glass, going to be great options here. And of course, in the rocket department, Hothead, preferably Adept, is going to be great, and then also Sleepless as well. Those are your weapon recommendations. I'll touch briefly on some mods to bring to your attention before we jump into our subclass picks. So this season in the artifact, we do have a chest piece mod, thermoshock plating. That's going to give you arc and solar. Very helpful. Definitely would run that for resistance. And then if you're thinking about other types of resistance here, you have some options. Sniper resistance is going to be useful in the boss room for those tracer shanks that show up on high. Those can definitely wipe you in the final damage phase when you really need to go quick to kill that boss. You could do arc resistance just to stack with thermoshock plating. That's a multiplier, that is how it stacks here. So you'll be getting not as much gains as you normally would, but it's a lot of arc damage. You can help combat that burn, and then of course the actual damage, all the arc damage that comes out of the fallen weapons. The other thing to consider too, if you are dying to a lot of close range enemies, whether it's the invisible marauders or some of the shanks that get up close, melee resistance can be another solid pick there. I think it kind of will just depend on your experience. What are you in particular struggling with here? That's how you can curate your resistance mods. Especially going to be helpful if you say have a fire team member that goes down near enemies and you absolutely need to go get that res for whatever reason. Melee resist might be the best pick, but that's going to be up to you. Just going to give off a bunch of picks there. Whatever works for you. Definitely include thermoshock plating. The other three options, I think, kind of you can curate to your playstyle, to your experience. So those are our recommendations. Now we're going to get into subclasses. We'll start as always with the Hunter.
Yes, so I have 3 builds I'm going to talk about, to which I'm going to sort of not gloss over, but summarize really quickly because I have very recently talked about them. Last episodes, we had another Arc Grandmaster with Lightblade, which is 2 builds that I recommended were related to skip grenades and blinding grenades, or flashbang grenade, leading into the whole blind gimmick. But for the main build that I'm going to recommend here is the Shinobu's Vow skip grenades build. Super class ability. It's really up to you. Gathering Storm is really great for that burst damage. Arc Staff has a potential use here because of the ads spawning in. They are in close proximity. You are also in close proximity as well. So there could be a use case here, but just because of the explosive shanks, they could, rock up at any time, and you don't want to arc staff those because you may, maybe not necessarily kill yourself, but you can really bring your health down. So Gathering Storm's probably the safest bet. But if you're, used to this particular strike, you could opt for Arc Staff. Exotic is obviously Shinobu's Vow. With skip grenades, your melee is either combination or disorienting blow, whichever you prefer. And for the aspects, you want to go for flow states and either Tempest Strike or Lethal Current. For this particular Grandmaster, I think Tempest Strike may be the best option. There is some great synergy with Flow State and Lethal Current, which I also talked about last episode, but Tempest Strike has that range jolt option, which you don't get that with any of your melees because they are just very close range. For the fragments, going to go for Beacons, Amplitude, Discharge, which gives you that -10 strength, Shock, which is that -10 discipline, and both Amplitude and Discharge have a 10-second cooldown. For specific mods, essentially you want to go for Harmonic Siphon to get that orb spawn, Font of Might, High Energy Fire, Elemental Charge, and Elemental Ordnance. Good to have. You can have Bomber or Bolstering Detonation. Alternatively, again, I discussed the sort of pros and cons of either using Elemental Ordnance or Firepower. You could opt for Firepower instead. But I think Firepower just goes a little bit too down the route of you're really focusing on just using skip grenades, whereas you can use Elemental Ordnance and have the options of using Font of Might and High Energy Fire. So Impetus mentioned earlier on with the weapon picks, I am also going to recommend those sort of arc special ammo weapons, ideally with Chain Reaction or Reservoir Burst, just to capitalize on the blinding effect that you get with beacons. So for example, Forbearance, Salvager's Salvo, Midas Reckoning, Plug 1, but you can use any normal arc specials and do just fine here. Those just have this sort of premium maximum capability when you pair it with beacons. Reminder, Salvager's Salvo can be purchased directly at the Tower Weapons Kiosk for some endgame currency. Optionally, sort of other weapons, again, arc heavy, rockets, LFRs, or machine guns. I know the sort of main setup of build that I've been using, not for these Grandmasters, but kind of higher end content, is an SMG in my primary slot, Forbearance with Chain Reaction in my special slot, and Thunderlord as my heavy weapon. And it's doing really good work. Lots of electricity everywhere, lots of lightning. But really go for, I think, for this particular close range, rockets can be a little bit of a risk. But so LFRs, if you've got a Storm Chaser, go for that, or you can go for Sail Spy as well. For the stat spread, Resilience and Discipline, then Mobility. Again, you can go over 50 mobility, but when you are amplified, which will be happening quite a lot, you do get that intrinsic plus 50 mobility. Strength and intellect are not really important here, just because of the gameplay loop. And if you can afford it, you can spend some on recovery. So again, I have talked about this before. Like I'm recycling information here, but I didn't talk about the sort of gameplay loop for this particular build, which I will talk about now. So the main gameplay loop: you're throwing your grenades. That spark of shock applies the jolt. Grenades regen on hit. Kills will spawn arc wells, which will then buff your arc weapons. So the list here is the buffed arc weapons will then become amplified. The kills trigger beacons that cause a blinding explosion. Buffed arc weapons or the blinding explosion will go into the multi-kills, which trigger discharge, which spawns that ionic trace. Amplitude, which spawns that power of orb of power, and harmonic siphon, which spawns separately another orb of power. So you've got two completely separate orb of powers here. Third point here: arc wells and ionic traces into refreshing your buff timer on arc weapons, spawning those wells, which provides ability regen, which again spawns wells and ionic traces. Fourth point here: collecting arc wells, ionic traces, and orbs, then just sort of loops back into itself. It feeds this self-sufficient power fancy, and then you're just repeating back to one. So you're just throwing your grenades and cycling through all this again. Disorienting Blow is there if you want to use it, which does prime, amplified, and blind. But you can, very risky going up close, especially in this strike. So it's there as an option just to prime your amplified and your blind. And then obviously Tempest Strike, as I mentioned, does prime that jolt from long range. Alternatively, you could go for that arc blind build that I've spoken about much more length in episode 35 in the previous episode. 2 more builds here. I'll very quickly summarize the Void one, which you may want to opt for. That is your sort of invis auxiliary Night Stalker role. So you'll be applying Trapper's Ambush just as many times as you'll be finishing combatants, because you'll be using Sect of Insight Aeon Gauntlets just to spawn those special and heavy drops for your teammates. So Deadfall, Gambler's Dodge, Grenade for you want to go for Vortex for a grenade, Aspects, Trapper's Ambush, and Vanishing Step, and the echoes are Undermining, Obscurity, and Provision, and specific mods are your Harmonic Siphon, Momentum Transfer. You want to go for 3 times Well of Strikings, Overcharge Wellmaker, and Bountiful Wells. So when you finish a combatant, you will turn invisible, you'll spawn a bunch of Arc Wells because of Overcharge Wellmaker. You can use those Arc Wells to charge up your melee. And you'll also allow your teammates to pick them up as well. And just go nuts with your finishing combatants. There's no cooldown on spawning Elemental Wells. So again, I've talked about this in a previous episode. I think it was episode 34. For the last class, we're going to go for Stasis subclass. And that is the Revenant, Gambler's Dodge, Renewal's Grasp, Ager's Scepter. Alternatively, because Renewal Grasps is locked behind the Lost Sector farming, you could go for Frosties. Grenade here is Dustfield with Shuriken. Aspects with the Touch of Winter and Grim Harvest. And we have 5 Whispers fragments here. We've got Hedrons, which is that -10 strength. Chains for that +10 recovery. Shards for that +10 resilience. Conduction for that +10 intellect and resilience. And Rhyme, which will give you that health bump and stasis overshield. There's a little bit of tweaking I've done very recently. It's a toss-up between if you want to go for Ordnance mods with Font of Might, guaranteed Font of Might, you can go down that route. And that is very specific where you're putting the mods. For your helmet, you want to go for Stasis. You can pop Power Preservation there, Harmonic Siphon, and Elemental Shards. For Renewal Grasp, you want to turn that into a Solar Affinity with Impact Deduction, Elemental Ordnance. For your chest, another Solar Affinity with Elemental Ordnance again. And for legs, again, it's Solar. You can go for Innovation ×2, or 1 with a Weapon Scav and Bountiful Wells. And for your cloak, you want to turn that into Stasis Affinity with Utility Kickstart ×2 and Font of Might. Alternatively, you could opt for Solar with Bombers. Now, the reason why I'm kind of suggesting that kind of build instead of Firepower, which is my alternate, is you're kind of building into the whole kind of general power fantasy here. Firepower does go down into the sort of mono type build with you're only throwing your dust field and you're getting it back very quickly, of course, but you are sacrificing Font of Might. So if you want a power build, go for the Elemental Ordnance mods. If you want to just use your grenade all the time, go for Firepower. And for that, you want to go for Elemental Shards, Elemental Charge, Firepower ×3, and just to bump up the grenade returns, you could go Impact Deduction to get that 20% grenade energy. Bomber, one copy will give you 14% on dodge. 2 only provides 18%. It's not a lot. Quite a massive diminished gain there. Alternatively, instead of Firepower ×3, which does give you that 45% grenade return, and it consumes that charge with Light Stack per grenade throw, you could swap out High Energy Fire. Your grenade does go down to 30%, or you could swap it out with Font of Might as well. Again, it's entirely up to you how you want to pivot into there. It is quite an advanced build in terms of how you're using it, especially in this Grandmaster here. You're up against a lot of Overload champions, And as I've talked about in a previous episode, freezing is not sometimes it's not as helpful as you may think. So I've talked about all of these builds. The stasis subclass build is again one of my favorites, and all these builds are up on the Massive Breakdowns Discord server within the threads with all of our builds. And speaking of a build I think is up, or you're in the process of putting up, Saint, what have the Titans got?
Yeah, I'm going to be kind of riffing on the initial Arc 3.0 build that I outlined in the previous episode, but we're going to change some of the mods around just because of the way that the elements that we need to use for our specific armor pieces and stuff like that. So yeah, this is a build that will be available on the threads by the time you are hearing this audio. So we're going to start off with kind of our same set, exotic and subclass focus of Thunder Crash with Heart of Immos Light, Storm Grenades, and then Thunder Clap. So it's same baseline, and then we're going to start to change things up when we get into our fragments. On the fragment side, I'm going to be using Magnitude and Recharge. So Magnitude is the increased grenade duration, and then Recharge is the increase in grenade and melee regen when I'm critically wounded, which is happening quite a bit in GMs. And then after that would be Shock and Ions. Arc grenades jolt my targets, and then jolted targets create ionic traces. Titans aren't like super great at ionic traces, but this is a pretty easy way to do it. You could also do it with bad amplitude, but we're going to be using something else on our class item. And then I'm using Thunder and Knockout for my aspects, Touch of Thunder and Knockout, because they provide me with 4 slots, even though I'm not going to be using Knockout a ton. If I do get into a situation where I'm, just using my Thunder Clap to take out some shanks or some explosive shanks or something like that, immediately triggering that health regen never hurts. We do have another way to trigger our health regen, though, and that is going to be via our mods. I'm going to be using, right off the bat, Explosive Wellmaker Well of Life combo to generate some health from the elemental wells that I'm creating from my storm grenades. Anytime I'm getting multi-kills with my storm grenades, I'm spawning those wells. And then I'm also going to be using Elemental Ordnance to just feed right back into my subclass cooldowns. And then I like to cap this off with a Seeking Wells. You could use Well of Ordnance, which is giving you a little more grenade energy. I just like Seeking Wells. You throw the grenade, I can stay behind cover, and as long as I get close, those Arc and Solar Wells would just come right to me. I'm getting ability energy back, and I'm getting health regen for 10 seconds. And then finally, for my actual subclass targeted mod, I'm using Surge Detonators, which is going to allow my arc grenades to overload, which I've been having pretty good success with my lightning grenades. We've heard some rumors that Surge Detonators is not always working super consistently, but I haven't seen anything super concrete on that. Still having a good experience there with my lightning grenades. Still going to be using those. And then the last kind of important mod that I want to mention here is going to go into my loadout, my weapons. So for my weapons, I'm using usually a kinetic sniper, like a Secession with a Vorpal and Reconstruction. I'm using Lemon Arc for the overloads and the void shields, and then I'm going to use a Storm Chaser for just dealing out damage. You can swap out Storm Chaser for Hothead, like we've been talking about early on in the breakdown. I'm also running Overload Bow with my Lemon Arc, and I know this is one that sounds weird, but it is not redundant at all. Running the Overload Bow with your Lemon Arc is going to make the stuns way more consistent, and the little damage bonus that you're getting towards the Overload champions way more consistent. So running Overload Bow with a weapon that has intrinsic overload sounds redundant. It's really not. If you are running Lemon Arc, I would highly encourage you to try running it with Overload Bow, and I think that you will also find that there's a difference that you can easily perceive in the consistency, and I believe this has to do something with the way that you need to be perfectly drawn in order for the overload to tick in from the damage, but it's a little more forgiving on hit or on tick if you're using just a straight up mod. Yeah, so this is pretty much focusing on that Heart of Immos light build. We're swapping out Lightning Strikes twice for probably a Bomber mod on our class item, just because Lightning Strikes twice is great, but you could say that it's honestly too expensive when you're using Heart of Immos Light, and the benefit that you can get from just using your dash and bomber and melee ability and just throwing your grenade, getting those wells flowing, is probably going to be stronger than what you're getting from Lightning Strikes twice. Yeah, so I have the space on my class item for that, elemental armaments or whatever it may be, to just fit some extra mods in there, or an extra 3-point discipline mod or something like that, which I'm also going to be trying to max out here. When I'm looking at my sets, I usually I love to use D2 armor picker, and I pretty much set discipline and resilience to 10 and then see what else I can do. And that's kind of my build mindset for a lot of these builds like this. We're still sticking with surge detonators for those overloads, because it just can never hurt to have more. And then I would say that if you have two teammates that are running barrier shield piercing weapons, then you don't necessarily have to go with the overload sniper. You could swap that out for a blinding GL, which could help when you're in some tight corners type of a situation, things like that. Being able to blind some of these enemies when you're in these smaller rooms can be super helpful. So yeah, if you have two friends, fire team members that are going to be on shield piercing ammo for those barrier champions, for sure consider running the GL with your Luminarch, and you'll be able to deal with all the shield types pretty easily with this combo. This is kind of last thing I'll add on here is the firepower mod set. This, I prefer to run explosive and to be benefiting from this, and also be able to pick up my teammates' solar wells if that is a thing, and then being able to use those to my own benefit is also huge in here. But if you are just feeling like a capital G gamer and you want to go in here and just strictly focus on your damage output and not really worry about the survivability aspect of the build, you can swap out those elemental well mods for a taking charge, shield break charge, and firepower, which is just going to be an incredibly strong combination for even more storm grenades. This is kind of the taking it to 11 portion. You can still throw out a ridiculous amount of grenades just because of your your ionic traces, the wells that you're picking up, and things like that throughout the strike. The only other loadout that I'd mention here is just the Loreley build. Is kind of a classic one. This can be a difficult GM to survive in. A lot can. Just to kind of recap on a solid Loreley build for really keeping yourself alive. I'm going to be using Burning Maul here. I'm going to be using some incendiary grenades and then mini hammer. On my aspects, I'm going Soul Invictus and Consecration. And then on my fragments, I'm going Torches and Solace for that Radiance and extended duration of my Restoration and Radiance. And then Char and Ashes for really making the most out of my ignitions with Consecration and trying to take out large groups of enemies with that at a time. This kind of, you're healing. If you overload a champ and you jump in there and you consecrate the entire crowd, you can clear out a crowd of some enemies. It's just not nearly as effective as the arc grenade build because of the way that you're able to just have an insanely high uptime on your buffed storm grenades. But if you are looking around this out, you round it out with some elemental ordnance, elemental armaments, a little melee wellmaker, and then explosive wellmaker and well of life will just really lean into keeping yourself alive as much as possible. If you're really having a hard time just getting backed off by shanks, you're getting hit by the explosions, and you're just getting frustrated, kind of go back to the bread and butter. This is a little bit of a trade-off because in a way that good offense is like defense in a way. So, be ready to play a little bit more passively if you are going to go in with a build like this and not the storm grenades. You're not going to be quite just blowing through these rooms of enemies if you're not putting out that super high amount of passive damage from cover. That's all I have to say for the Titans. Mind your corners. Don't be afraid to run a blinding GL and just absolutely spam those storm grenades. All right. That is the way to a quick and clean Saber run. Impetus, what do you have for our Warlock friends?
Yeah, I am going to recommend the Arc subclass here. I think previously I talked about Void and Solar. I think Void's still a fine option here. The kit there is extremely strong for both just pure offense, but then also for crowd control if you're running something like Controverse Hold or Verity's Brow. I'm going to caution against Solar. I don't think Well is a safe play in here unless you are extremely familiar with the ad spawns. I think if you're trying to go into this for the first time, Well can certainly seem like a very nice option, a safe option. Due to the number of close quarters enemies in here, especially ones that can kill you quite quickly, like exploding shanks, I find that Well of Radiance can be quite dangerous, as it ends up being a trap. You feel like you're supposed to be safe inside the well, but enemies have no problem coming into the well, so you are encouraged then to get out of the well, but you're not as safe outside of the well. So I think in the heat of the moment, a lot of players can get trapped as soon as a well is placed down. If they're getting overwhelmed, you want to stay inside the Well of Radiance, but that can be the worst place to be in those instances. So I don't recommend Well of Radiance for that reason. If you are extremely familiar with ad spawns, you know what type of ads are about to come out. You can place down a well to quickly get ahead of those ad spawns so that you don't get overwhelmed. By all means, run it, especially if you're trying to farm this GM. It can be quite quick for experienced players, but for just a general first-time player or somebody who's getting into this for the first time to get a little bit faster, I'm going to put you on Arc. Just stay on Arc. You've got a lot of great options here. I've got 3 exotic armors I want to talk about here. For the super, I'm going to recommend keeping your distance, and so I will say Chaos Reach. I don't think Chaos will deal enough damage to really justify being a burst super. I think our weapons are also quite strong enough that you can just use those against the champions and the bosses, so Chaos Reach can be a great option for mid to long range ad clear in certain rooms. Just to pop that, you don't have to use up the whole super. You can stop halfway through. I don't recommend running Geomag stabilizers here. I think they're just better options. Super exotics aren't really in a strong place right now, but base Chaos Reach can get the job done for just kind of quick ad clear and then finishing off a champion if it's got less than a third health left. For the exotic armors here, Verity's Brow, Fallen Sunstar, and Aeon Gauntlets are my 3 recommendations depending on how you want to play. We are going to be using Storm Grenades on all 3. Again, I'm going to recommend Chain Lightning for the ranged melee option for all 3, and I'm going to recommend the same aspects for all 3. It's going to be Arc Soul and Electrostatic Mind. Arc Souls aren't going to be too strong in here without Getaway Artist, but again, just having that up to kind of point out where enemies are is going to be nice here, and it will, again, just be dealing kind of damage in the background for you, which can be very helpful. Electrostatic Mind, we're getting those ionic traces, making ourselves amplified when we pick them up. That's going to be very helpful here. The 3 fragments, the 3 sparks that I'm going to recommend, depending on whatever exotic you are using, is going to be Shock, Magnitude, and Recharge. Just making those grenades as strong as possible and then getting those grenades back as quickly as possible. If you are interested if you're looking for the 4th fragment, that's going to depend on which armor you're running. So for Aeon Gauntlets, I think Volts is going to be a pretty natural pairing, become amplified on finish. That seems kind of obvious. This is if you're needing to run this to get yourself special and heavy ammo. If you are running Fallen Sunstar, I did post a support build for that episode ago. I'm not going to recommend that build. That was more designed for raids and dungeons. This would be just using Fallen Sunstar kind of to generate ionic traces with an aggressive crowd control build. I would recommend Spark of Resistance for that extra resilience if you do find yourself suddenly surrounded by enemies as you're slaying out. If you are running Verity's Brow, Discharge is going to be helpful for those extra ionic traces to generate. Make sure you get those grenades back as quickly as possible. So those are my final 4th Spark picks, depending on which exotic armor you're recommending. For our mods, again, this is going to depend on what armor you're using. For our Aeon users, if you're going for that support build, Overcharge Wellmaker definitely is going to be a nice one there to get those wells on a finish. It is quite expensive. If you don't have room in your energy slot for that, I've got a nice little simple loop here that we can use to kind of help out. Elemental Ordnance, Elemental Charge, and then Reactive Pulse. So again, we're not hunters. We don't have access to Invis to go in and grab those finishes, so we got to look elsewhere for that. Reactive Pulse is going to give you that shield when you do get the finish off. That can be very helpful for kind of getting out of an area if you've still got ads up around that champion that you're going in to finish or that major enemy that you're going in to finish. So Reactive Pulse is definitely going to be a nice play there. Again, if you have space for Overcharge Wellmaker, that can also keep that loop going, get the wells in so that you can get stacks of light, charged with light for Reactive Pulse to proc. For the Fallen Sunstar mod set here, kind of just leaning into grenades, really. Elemental Ordnance, Elemental Charge to get Charged with Light, and then if you're looking for a Charged with Light mod, you could go with Firepower. If you're also having trouble staying alive, Heal Thyself is another great option there. Give yourself some health back. That can be very, very strong. For Verity's Brow, we're just going all in on grenade energy here. So I have elemental armaments. You're already needing to match one of your weapons to your arc subclass for Verity's Brow to proc the exotic armor effect. Might as well throw in elemental armaments to start generating wells based on your matching weapon kills. And then we're leaning into 3 elemental ordinances for more grenade energy, and we're using 3 of those because we're also using bountiful wells. So that will allow us to stack elemental ordnance to get even more wells off grenade kills. And of course, we're going to be throwing out those supercharged storm grenades with Verity's Brow once that exotic armor perk procs. Additionally, for Verity's Brow, I'd probably also throw in surge detonators. You're going to be using grenades anyways, might as well be able to stun overload champions. I'd probably still run an overload weapon on top of that. Lemon Arc's kind of a natural pairing there. But if you're finding that you have a grenade up every single time you need to stun an overload champion, that will definitely free up your energy slot for an arc weapon if you'd like. Bad Amplitude is the other kind of artifact mod that I would throw on there just for getting that jolt on the stunned champion. That's always going to be helpful for more synergies, of course. Finishing off those or killing those jolted enemies is going to proc a lot of other effects, your aspects and your fragments as well. So that's where Discharge comes in there on the fragment side. So again, a lot of different options kind of based on your familiarity level here. I think Verity's Brow, that build, if you want to be really effective, that's maybe more for a more experienced player. Aeon Gauntlets is always available depending on your skill level. You got your 2 other fire team members there to kind of clear ads for you as you go in for that finish. So if you're starting off, you want to be on the Arc subclass. Going into this GM for the first time, Aeons is going to be great here. And then Fallen Sunstar, of course, really any skill level here is going to be really happy, really effective. So you'll be able to contribute in many different ways just by killing everything with your grenades and getting that ionic traces. And if your fire team members are close by, they also get a little bit of ability energy, which they'll appreciate as well. So those are my 3 recommendations for the Arc Warlock subclass. We are now going to head into the Fallen Saber GM. Again, this is not going to be a full breakdown. We're really just going to highlight some pain points for our newer players and then just talk about some good tips and strategies within those pain points. So I will pass you off back to Cord.
All right, yeah. So we'll do some sort of good to know information here. I think the last couple of episodes we've been talking about what's triggering the ads. I think that's really important to highlight for both new players to Grandmasters and established players. Just get, master the craft of when and where do these ads spawn. So this is a crashed warsat area. Now be careful when you enter this area. You may get slammed in the face with this with the crashed warsat. So just take it nice and easy as you enter that play space. But when you do, what's going to trigger the following ads, the spawns, is capturing the warsat. So you want to step off to pause the capture so you can deal with any currently spawned ad waves. And you don't want to rush through this unless you want a barrage of ships and ad waves. And just a little important thing to highlight here is remember to shoot the fallen ship turrets. You can damage them even if they're not showing. So when they get in range, they're normally tucked in kind of behind this kind of shield on the ship turret, on the fallen ships. But you can damage them whenever you can see the ships. And they do have a fair amount of HP. Not as before. I think a couple, maybe 6-7 seasons ago, they had a lot of HP, but they have been since reduced. And you can take care of them quite easily. And if you are struggling to do that, you can use Hacky Breach Armament, Scouts, and Autos just to pair that with your anti-barrier weapons. So the following percentages is where the ads start spawning. So 1% is where the first ship will spawn. And that ship will come across the valley and it will start dropping off ads on the cliffside part of the arena. At 17%, there'll be more ads. 23%, more ads again. And then at 34% is probably where you want to step off. This is where you'll have a bunch of ads. You'll also have your first overload captain. So deal with any ads. There'll be a lot of invisible marauders. There'll be dregs. There'll just be, a few shanks here and there. Deal with that first, and then hop back on once you're ready. And at 42% trigger is the second ship wave. Now, there'll be 2 ships here, and these will spawn further inland near the sort of hive construction where the tomb ship has crashed onto the planet. So that's where they'll spawn. So a bunch of ads will spawn there. At 55%, again, this will be another kind of trigger point where you want to step off. Everyone gets off here, kill the barrier servitor, any ads that are kind of straggling here, and hop back on. 63%, there'll be even more ads. And at 70%, you'll get your third and final ship wave spawn. And again, this will look back to the cliffside where the ads will spawn. At 75%, there'll be another overload captain with a bunch of ads. And then at 100% is where you'll capture the warsat. All the ads will despawn at this point, with the exception of any remaining champions. A couple of ways you can do this. You could do this as normal. I've seen a few strategy with invis hunters. They can just keep going perpetually invis on the capture zone. It's a little bit risky if you're not aware or sure of the sort of loop, whether it's using Trapper's Ambush into Vanishing Step and then back into Trapper's Ambush. If you want to go down that really pseudo-safe route. But it's relatively easy to do this manually. There's a few kind of, out-of-bound tricks you can do with a few emotes. You can, spawn, or not spawn, but you can sit inside the warsat and the ads don't detect you. But you don't want to do that. That's not as fun. Get in with all the action here. You've got a bunch of champions. Nothing's too hard here. But yeah, pretty simple enough. Again, just taking your time here. Just watching out for those trigger points here. So once you've done this, you'll enter the bunker and you'll get to the bypass security room. That's where you destroy the fuse to open up some vents. This is the first of many tight rooms. There'll be a lot of shanks, a lot of sniper vandals, a lot of invisible marauders as well. There'll also be initially an overload and a barrier at the far, basically where you'll destroy the fuse. This is actually one thing that I have only recently discovered, that you can use your Sparrow to wedge open the door, so you can snipe further back. So you can put your Sparrow just where, if it's safe to do so, obviously it might be very risky to get your Sparrow up to that point, but if you can, just put it on where the doors open, put it there, and it'll stop the doors from closing, because the doors are triggered by proximity of where you are. So once most of the ads are, you've cleared up, sniped, a few of the ads are clear, just slowly enter and clear up any stragglers. You want to focus on the barrier champion first, as it usually immunes the overload, because they tend to sort of sit near each other. And because it's a servitor, it'll just start doing that really annoying tether immune gimmick. So barrier champion has to go down first, unfortunately. You can stun the overload, just to kind of put him out of action for a few seconds. But burst down that barrier champion first, and then hop over to the overload. And once that room's clear, shoot the fuse to cause the next ad wave spawn. Before you do, though, everyone wants to head back to where the entrance was, the little entrance part of the hallway. Because you can shoot the fuse from there. You can snipe it from there. Because when you do, lots of vandals, marauders, explosive shanks, tracer shanks, and 2 overload champions will spawn. So have everyone return to that entrance tunnel. You will be able to snipe the fuse. 2 overloads will spawn in the entrance tunnel, so you want to be as far back as if you're heading back outside of the bunker, or as if you're heading that way anyway. Focus on one, burst it down, and then focus on the second. If it's there, sometimes it'll disappear, it'll teleport away. And then, again, it's just repeat as before, sniping any stragglers, focus on any sort of remaining overloads if you didn't get that second one. And if the second one is aggroing, then yeah, focus on it and range it. This one's a bit tricky just because there's been various times where I've, rather than going back to the entrance tunnel, shoot the fuse and do damage from there, but because you don't have really an exit route, that's where the risk problem is. That's where you may fall at the first hurdle, so to speak. Just a lot of shanks and a lot of ads will start spawning and aggroing towards you, which is why I'm suggesting you go back to the entrance hall and do everything as if you're entering it for the first time. So yeah, that's the first sort of two hurdles. Impetus, what have we got up next?
Yes, so the next big area here is going to be the Arc Hallway, the Flume of Doom, whatever you want to call it. This is where you are going to be picking up that charge and then running all the way down the length of the hallway to deposit it, while you have shanks and then electric charges running down those two tracks on the left and right side of the hall. So you've kind of got two different strats here. I think the safest, simplest one is to just go nice and slow. You're going to have the one person picking up that charge, and then the other two focusing on dealing with your shanks, but then taking care of the person running. So invis hunters, obviously you guys will have a lot of this kind of locked down just by going invis. The best strat there is to go invisible, pick up the charge, go invisible again with a dodge, kind of pick it up again. When you'll need to drop it to go invis that second time to lengthen your timer. You then pick it up and then keep making your way down to go deposit. Alternatively, if you're on the Arc subclass, Amplify plus Speed Boosting Slide can really, really get you down there quickly. If your fire team members are really good about knowing when to shoot the explosive shanks to leave them alive, not when they're near your charge carrying member, that can be a really quick way to kind of get through it. But the slide strat is definitely very useful, especially, regardless of whatever subclass you're going on. Sliding while you're holding the charge as you're running down that track gets you pretty fast. So you're kind of standing up, sliding as you're sprinting. That should get you pretty quick movement. Again, hunters go invis along the way, dropping the charges you need to keep maintaining the invis so you don't get shot. Alternatively, if you're on an Arc subclass, just slide as soon as you get amplified. So that is the two different methods that I'd recommend for the Arc Hallway. Immediately after the charge has been deposited and any enemies in there have despawned or been destroyed, you're going to head into the second to last room. This is another tight room, kind of a lot of enemies that spawn, but they all spawn at the far side of the room, so you can set up shop or you can kind of hang out in that hallway before you go into the room. It really depends on your comfort level. You're going to have snipers, you're going to have a lot of drags, shanks, and then you're going to have an overload right off the rip, but you will have a barrier and a second overload spawn in, again, at the far side of the room as the ads are being killed. So this is kind of an area where supers and grenades are going to do a lot of heavy lifting for you. Jolting is going to be very, very effective in here. You're going to be chaining a lot of electricity. It depends on your setup here. If you have a super that is really good for ad clear or even a little bit of boss damage as well, like a Gathering Storm would be really strong here. Chaos Reach at the back can be very useful. Make sure you pop those, I would say maybe after that first overload is killed, just to really clear out some enemies right as the second champions show up, the second wave of champions show up. That can be very effective. Grenades kind of at your feet and then also further back, just spacing that stuff out can be really effective for slowing down the invisible enemies as well as those shanks that love to get up close. It really kind of depends. I'd say if you're going through this the first time, maybe hang out in that hallway before you get into the room, just kind of doing peek shooting. If you feel a little bit more comfortable, you can step into the room. You're going to have two pillars on the right and the left side. On your side as you enter in, you can take that as cover. Just be aware of the enemies, the dregs and the shanks that will try to get up close to you. Again, just being constant communication here. This doesn't have to be chaotic, call out stuff. I would probably, actually, knowing what's coming, don't even worry about finishing the champions. If any of you are running Aeons, you can just use all of your ammo on the champions here to kill them, stun them, and then kill them. You will have opportunities to finish champions in the next room right after this, which is your last room before you head into the boss room. So this room here is a bit more open. That's immediately a negative thing because you're going to have some sniper dregs immediately looking at you as you approach. So kind of take cover in the hallway. You'll have some side areas that you can hide, deal with them. You will have 4 champions in this room. One of them will be a barrier servitor that'll be up on a kind of a higher platform up into the right side. And then you will have 3 overload chieftains that are all right next to each other, far to the left backside. So again, we want to deal with our stragglers, the long range stragglers. Then we deal with the barrier champion. If you're able to get up to that platform for a finish, great. If not, don't worry about it. But you want to leave the 3 overloads for last, regardless of if you need to finish with Aeons. So basically the strategy here with the 3 overloads, they're going to all stay right next to each other in that very confined space. So something like Surge Detonator Overload, Arc Grenades are going to be really effective for getting all of the champions stunned immediately. Le Monarch can also do this quite quickly. Thunderlord could do this quite quickly with the AoE effect that they all have. But the most important thing is to pick one of the 3 overloads to burst down immediately. You don't want to be stunning all 3 over and over and over again. You just pick one, stun it, burst it down, use supers if you need to, use special weapons if you need to finish. This is the perfect opportunity. I would try and go for each overload, all 3, get as much ammo as you can heading into that boss room. But you just pick one. Typically, you want to pick the one that all 3 of you have a pretty good sightline on, stun it, burst it down, move on to the second and the third. And that should get you through this last room pretty safe, pretty quickly. If someone does die in here with the overloads kind of teleporting around, make sure you just stun them. Have third fire team member stunning while the second one goes in for the revive. Again, just communicate with your team. This does not have to be chaotic. It can be intense with just the sheer number of champions in this room, but just call it out, pick one, deal damage at the same time, and you'll be through this last room with very little struggle, where you can then head along the hallway and down the very fun slide. I know some people die going down the slide to the boss room here. I have found that if I touch the physical area, the strategy a lot of people use is they just try to jump without touching the slide to make it all the way to the floor. That can be a little bit dangerous. You might break your ankles coming down. I have found that when I land on the sliding room wall down to that boss room, I just don't move my mouse at all. I don't aim at all for my controller players. You just kind of just take your hands off the keyboard, take your hands off the controller, slide all the way down, and then once you're finally on the bottom there, you can move around freely. I've never died that way, so I think it's something to do with players trying to avoid or hitting the wall at a funny angle. But if you just run down into the sliding wall, don't jump at all, don't touch your controller or your mouse and keyboard, wait until your feet have landed on the ramp, you should be good to go for the boss room. Saint, what can we expect in the boss room?
In the boss room, we are kind of in like a little diamond-shaped arena. You're going to have a lot of shanks coming out of the walls and the floor, and then a few barriers to worry about, including the boss as he goes through a couple of different phases. So our main spawn points that we are going to be looking at here are just some holes in the wall that are going to be on the upper and lower sides on the left and right side. And then we'll kind of have a close, the floor in the center where the boss will first appear from. Some shanks will spawn out of there, as well as a podium in the back where you'll have some normal shanks and barrier champs that spawn. Whenever we first get down into the arena, you'll just take out a few low-level enemies, and then we're going to get straight into the boss after he spawns up out of the floor. Whenever the boss spawns in, his first crit spot is going to be his little arms, his little T-Rex arm node things that kind of stick up out of his sides, and he will have his solar range kind of sniper attack that he's going to be using at you and your fire team right off the bat. Whenever you are positioning, you'll probably want to make your way over to the little right side of the center there and make your working from the right wall to look at all the different enemy spawns. The little spawn holes in the walls and stuff like that we talked about, there are little lights near them, and you will see the lights kind of pulsating to indicate, okay, there's enemies coming out here. It's like little warning signs going off, and you have shanks spawning out. When we are on that right wall and we're looking into the arena, you should have a pretty good view of the boss. And when you're damaging him, you will have some just normal shanks throughout the arena spawning in. And then once you get his first 25% of health down, you get that boss down to 75% damage, he'll hit his threshold and move back. And he can still shoot at you in this space, by the way. So it's just don't get too close, because he will definitely just snipe you right out of there if you get caught jumping across his field of view when he is up on his back platform. as soon as you trigger that first immunity phase, you'll have a barrier champ spawn in, and we'll have some normal champs spawn in throughout the walls. The barrier champ should be spawning up by his podium up there. And then once we clear those, he'll go back into phase 2. His crit spots are still going to be his little arm nodes that are sticking out. You can stay on that right wall in that corner there from kind of where you dropped in. There will be some arc energy charged columns now, so you need to watch out for that. You can still use that area to move around on, just kind of strafe back and forth, making sure that you're just taking out those shanks as soon as they spawn in. You're now going to have some explosive shanks, and these are the deadly ones. These are the run enders, especially, you see people get caught up maybe a little too far on the right side, and they're not paying attention to what's behind them, and then they're looking at a recap screen as they go to orbit all of a sudden. Once you hit 50% damage, he'll do his other threshold. He goes back to the back. You get another barrier champion, and then we get some sniper shanks. So the tracer shanks that are coming up out of the walls, kind of at the top, the left and the right sides, as well as a few normal shanks. The tracer shanks are brutal. So, you maybe stun your champ, clear out the tracer shanks real quick with your primaries, and then after you clear out that barrier champ and these other little ads that have spawned in your tracer shanks and your normal shanks, you will go into the third phase, which is where the boss kind of changes up his appearance just a little bit.
Yeah, things get really things heat up here. So the boss crit spot is now moved. It's no longer his little T-Rex arms. It's now his sort of face, the eye sensors. The solar sniper attack is now disabled. It's now the void dual miniguns in place of the previous crit spots. So positioning here, you want to head over to the left behind the columns that are now sticking out from the floor at an angle. Really great cover over here. The right side wall, which you may have been using, will be a no-go due to the new arc energy environmental kind of element now. So that will be blocking that part of the arena. The right side behind the rising columns are also, again, arc energy charged. So again, maybe a little bit too dangerous to be on the right side at this point. And if you get too close to them, it will be an insta-kill. So during the phase, you will have explosive shanks from the center floor. They will rise up and then periodically around the arena through the wall holes. So things really start to heat up. There's no more boss immunity. This is it. You can really start shredding the boss at this point, getting all your supers out. So once it gets to 25%, the boss will change appearance again, immediately goes into phase 4. So it's the sort of same crit spot here. It's giant exposed faceplate. You can see the innards of Saber. The Void Dual miniguns attack have now been disabled, and Saber goes full berserk, sicko mode, and aggressively tracks players and has a arc close range melee attack. You get very close to Saber here, you will probably go down. It's a very high damage attack he will do, and it's sort of this pseudo area of effect damage as well. So this is where you may want to start moving around the arena. Now, there's going to be a lot going on here. If you're opting to really just burst down the boss, you can do that. This is your prime opportunity. Get your Thunder Crashes in there, your Gathering Storms, your Chaos Reaches, whatever you're using here. If you're taking it nice and slow, you will need to start moving across the arena. The columns sticking out on the left side, they will begin moving. So it'll reset back to the floor position and then back to upright position. So it may not give you as much coverage here. It will be a rough position due to the nearby newly arc-charged beams, and the boss will aggro to this position aggressively as well. So rotate back to the center and then right, all the while taking care of the boss, and you'll have some spawning ads. A lot of Tracer Shanks will spawn in the upper wall holes, but hopefully by this point you'll have the boss down to 5% health, and you should hopefully avoid those Tracer Shanks. So a lot going on. Phases 3 and 4 can be a little bit of a run killer here. You just take it nice and methodical. Communication is key here. Get that massive burst of super damage during 3 and 4. And this should be a cakewalk. So what time are we expecting to complete here? First time clear, 30 to 45 minutes, roughly. Yeah. Repeat clears. 20-minute mark for the repeat clears.
Yeah.
What were you going to say there, Saint?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, the it's really tempting to want to like burn through the war sat phase and just like clear it as quickly as possible, and that is for sure possible. But when you are just really taking your time in the first few runs, trying to like manage your waves of the war sat super carefully, it's just gonna take a minute.
I think this strike in particular, I think we always say take it nice and slow and easy and methodical. This is one of those strikes that really does well if you just, great clear communication and just taking it like piece by piece, A to B to C to D. You're not doing everything all at once. You can control when the ads spawn, even in the boss. The boss fight, you can control when he goes immune. He can be deadly at sometimes, but at least in phases 1 and 2, you can okay, I'm going to go hide and charge up my super. So this strike really is quite indicative to that playstyle of taking it nice and segmented. In terms of what's the most taxing arena or counter segment here, for the first time clear, I think it would be the Warsat if you're taking it really fast, if you're not taking the sort of considerations of when the ads spawn. And if you don't stagger those spawns, then it can be a lot of ads spawn at once. You don't want to do that. For repeat clears, again, it's the boss fight here. Communication falls short. Those tracer and explosive shanks are left unchecked. Those are the real run killers here. And of course, the boss can be very accurate with its sniper weapon. And its arc charge, its sicko mode.
Yeah, you don't give that thing a chance because he will check you in place real quick.
So I think really important to highlight in the boss room, just movement. Once it gets to phase 4, you want to start moving. You can't be in one place because that Saber, he's got a death wish before he dies. And generally the entire arena's environmental dangers can be unforgiving as well. So just watch where you're stepping, because you cannot resist mod those environmental dangers because they are just a one-shot kill. They aren't classified as combatants, so they don't count for these resist mods. So just take it nice and easy, nice and slow, and you'll get a nice run clear. All right, so I think that's anything else we want to talk about?
No, I mean, it's not a bad one, honestly, for the season. There are a few, like, annoying parts. You get caught by the electricity or sniped by a shank or something, but it's not too bad of a GM all in all. That is all that we've got for episode 36. We look forward to seeing how all these upcoming changes land, all of just the economy stuff, the sandbox stuff, maybe machine guns coming up in the meta finally. Excited to see all that hit the game in season 19. Thanks for listening into another episode of PvE, and thanks to our audio engineer, MisterSudden, for helping us sound our best each and every episode. Until next time, my name is Sink Beer. You can find me by that name on Discord, Twitter, and YouTube. Court, where can listeners find you?
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter as @CourtProjects and on Discord as Court, although we are sporting some Halloween names for the season. So if you can't see us, my name is still Court, but it's another nickname. And of course, you can find my spreadsheets and documentations over on the Massive Breakdowns website, where there'll be a bunch of other community-resourced applications and documentation to enhance your Destiny experience. Impetus, where can we find you?
My name is Impetus. You can find me by that name on Discord and in Destiny, and as Impetus always on Twitter and Twitch. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll have another GM breakdown next week. We'll also have Festival of the Lost to talk about, so that should be fun to look forward to. The weapon changes, the new weapon coming out should be very exciting. Until then, have a great week. Good luck with the GM farms. We'll see you next time.